Get her off the convoy list. She's a medic. That's an order, Sergeant. Lieutenant Sayer said it the way some people say things they expect will end a conversation. Flat, final, not a question. Sergeant First Class Fallon, who had spent 19 years in the Army and had a particular ability to identify exactly what kind of officer he was dealing with, inside the first 48 hours, picked up his coffee and said nothing. The silence that followed lasted long enough to qualify as an answer without being one. Staff Sergeant Darrow was standing 6 feet away. She had heard every word. She had also heard the 17 other conversations in this room that had subtracted her from their calculations before anyone had looked up from a clipboard, and she had learned to treat those words the way she treated ambient noise, recorded, filed, and set aside until they became relevant. 31 days later, she lay prone on a rooftop in Ramadi, 1,540 meters from a man who had killed 4 of her fellow soldiers in 11 days. And she made a decision in the space between one heartbeat and the next that Sayer would never entirely be able to explain in any report he wrote. Darrow had been in the Army since she was 19 years old. She had enlisted as a combat medic, which was where the Army said her aptitude scores pointed, and she had been thorough and capable at it, stitching wounds, reading vitals, making decisions at speed in conditions that reduced other people to paralysis. She was good at it, but good at something and built for something are not the same thing. And Darrow had understood from the first time she qualified on a rifle range at Fort Sam Houston that the two did not have to be in conflict. Her father had taught her to shoot on a ranch outside Cody, Wyoming, starting when she was 9 years old. He had been a man of almost no unnecessary conversation, which Darrow had inherited in full, and his instruction had been mostly by demonstration. He would set the target, establish the distance, and hand her the rifle. He would watch. If she missed, he would say wind or breath or trigger and nothing more. If she hit, he would nod. In the household where she had grown up watching her mother manage a cattle operation across 400 acres and 2 hired hands, competence was not praised. It was assumed once demonstrated and then simply expected to continue. Darrow had found that arrangement clarifying. By the time she was 16, she was outscoring her father at distances past 700 meters. He began driving her to a long-range competition circuit in eastern Wyoming on weekends. She placed second in her first regional competition. She placed first in every one after that, not because she was performing, because she was doing math. She had understood early that long-range shooting was a physics problem with one variable that couldn't be fully calculated in advance. Herself, the wind, the distance, the temperature, the bullet drop at any given range, all of that could be worked out before the trigger moved. The variable was the stillness she could achieve in the space between her heartbeats, the consistency of the moment she chose to squeeze. Everything else was arithmetic. The Army had put her in the medical corps, and she had made peace with that. Because making peace with things she could not immediately change was something she had learned from her mother. But she had cross-trained in marksmanship at every opportunity available to her, through 2 deployments and 1 stateside tour, until she had the kind of reputation that travels without being announced, the kind that other soldiers mention to each other in passing and eventually stop mentioning because it has become an assumption rather than a novelty. Until Lieutenant Sayer had walked into a briefing room in Camp Ramadi on a Thursday in September 2005 and decided, in the space of 1 administrative review, that she was a medic and nothing more. Sayer was 26 years old. He was organized and technically current and gave clean briefings, which Darrow acknowledged internally because she had a habit of noting what people did well, even when they were doing other things badly. He had come from a family with a long officer lineage. She had gathered this without being told, from the way he held his rank like something he had been handed rather than something he had earned. He was not a bad officer by the measured definitions. He was, however, a man who had arrived at this unit with a map of how things were supposed to be. And whenever the territory did not match the map, his tendency was to trust the map. Darrow, in Sayer's map, was a medical asset. Her place in the unit's operational architecture was the aid station and the convoy's rear position. That she had been attached to patrol elements in her previous deployment and had formally qualified as a designated marksman was information that Sayer had looked at and chosen to arrange into a shape that fit the rest of his picture. She was a medic. That was what the map said. Sergeant First Class Fallon was 53. He had the kind of face that no longer registered surprise as an emotion. Something about sustained exposure to the full range of human behavior had worn that particular expression down to nearly nothing. He ran his section with the quiet authority of someone who has long since stopped needing to prove he has authority, and he had been watching Sayer for 2 weeks with the settled, measuring attention of a man deciding how much runway to allow before intervening. He mentioned Darrow to Sayer once in the 3rd week during an after-action on a vehicle checkpoint operation. He noted, factually and without emphasis, that she had identified a secondary exit route that the patrol leader had missed, and that her read on the situation had been correct. Sayer had looked at his notes and said good catch and moved on. He attributed it in the written summary to patrol element observation. Her name did not appear. Darrow read the summary. She did not mention what she had noticed. She was sitting with Fallon in the motor pool 2 days later, doing the kind of routine maintenance that gives soldiers something to do with their hands while their minds work on other things, when she said it, not as a complaint, just as an observation, the way she might mention that the wind had shifted direction. He writes patrol element, she said. Not a name. Fallon kept working. He didn't look up right away. I saw, he said. Does it read as a pattern to you? He set down his wrench. He looked at her with the steady, undecorated attention he reserved for questions that deserved a real answer. It reads as a man who knows what he should call things and hasn't yet been made uncomfortable enough to change, he said. She nodded. She looked back at the vehicle panel in front of her. What's his actual problem, do you think? Fallon picked the wrench back up. He thinks the map is the territory, he said. He'll learn otherwise or he won't. Either way, your job right now is to be ready for whatever he isn't watching. She thought about that for the rest of the day. The sniper had been operating for 11 days before Darrow made the connection that no one else had assembled yet. She had not been assigned to the intelligence analysis. That was not her job. But she had been processing the medical reports from every contact in the area of operations. It was her job to track casualty patterns for triage preparation, and she had begun to notice something in the wound data that the intelligence summaries were not reflecting. 4 killed in action in 11 days, all officers or senior NCOs, all single-shot wounds to the upper body, all on routes that passed within a specific distance of the Western Industrial District. She had pulled the grid coordinates of each incident and laid them against a terrain map she had borrowed from the operations center on a pretext of checking evacuation routes. When she worked backward from wound entry and exit data in the medical reports, calculating trajectory angles the way she had spent years calculating trajectories on Wyoming hillsides, they all converged on a rough arc of possible positions in the northwestern corner of the industrial district. Not a sector, a building. She flagged this to Fallon on a Thursday evening in a communication that consisted of 2 sentences and a hand-drawn diagram. He looked at it for a long moment and said, "You need to take this to Sayer." "I know," she said. He looked at her. The expression on his face was not enthusiasm exactly, but it was the closest she had seen from him since she had arrived. "Do it formally. Put it in writing first. Take me with you." "Tomorrow morning," she said. The briefing the next day lasted 7 minutes. Sayer listened to the presentation. He looked at her diagram. He looked at the coordinates she had marked. He looked at her across the folding table with the specific expression of a man who has already arranged an answer in his head and is waiting to deliver it. "The intelligence shop has reviewed the Wadi district contacts," he said. "Their assessment is opportunistic attacks. Separate actors, different approach vectors." Darrow kept her voice flat. "The wound data doesn't support separate approach vectors, sir. If you trace the entry angles back across the grid, they all point to a concentrated position in the northwest sector of the industrial area. That's not consistent with multiple independent actors. That's consistent with one shooter in one fixed position." Sayer looked at the diagram again. It was not the look of someone reconsidering. It was the look of someone searching for the technical counter-argument that would close the conversation. "Our intel shop has eyes on the whole Wadi corridor," he said. "They haven't flagged a single fixed position. With respect, sir, I'm not using the same data they're using. The wound profiles aren't being fed into the pattern analysis. They're in the medical logs." He set the diagram down. "Your medical assessment is noted, Sergeant. We'll maintain current protocols." She did not push. She had made the case. She had put the math on the table. She looked at Fallon, who was standing behind her and slightly to the left. Fallon was looking at a point approximately 6 inches above Sayer's left shoulder, which was where Fallon looked when he was maintaining his expression by an act of conscious discipline. "Thank you for your time, sir," Darrow said. She turned and walked out. Fallon followed. In the hallway, he said quietly, not really to her in particular, "He'll learn otherwise then." She didn't answer. She was already thinking about the building. Private First Class Trent had been in country for 3 months. He was 21 years old, from Flagstaff, and he asked questions the way certain people breathe, not because they were trying to be difficult, but because their mind wouldn't let them stop. He had a quality that Darrow had recognized over the first weeks. He was not performing curiosity. He was genuinely trying to understand things, and there was something almost disarming about how openly he approached what other soldiers would have been too careful to ask. He found her at the range one evening, 11 days after the briefing with Sayer, 4 days before everything changed. She was shooting at a target she had set up well beyond what anyone else on the base was currently using the range for. "Sergeant Darrow," he said, "that's past 500 meters. 1,300, she said, without looking up from the scope. He stood there. She heard him doing the math. "That's past the posted effective range." Yes, she fired. She did not need to tell him she had hit. He had been watching her long enough to read the post-shot stillness in her shoulders. "Why train past effective range?" he asked. She pulled back from the scope and looked at him directly. "Because in 4 days, we're going into the Western Industrial District, and what I think is there is not at effective range." He was quiet for a moment. She glanced at him. He was looking at the distant target with an expression that had gone from curious to something quieter. "You think Sayer's wrong," he said. It was not a question. "I think the data says something specific," she said. "Whether anyone acts on it before it acts on us is a different question." He was quiet for another beat of his own thinking. Then he sat down on the berm behind her and watched her shoot for the next hour without saying another word. Later, he told Fallon what he had seen. Fallon listened without comment. When Trent was done, Fallon said, "Good. Stay behind her when it matters." Trent said, "What does that mean?" Fallon said, "You'll know when it matters." The night before the patrol, Darrow did not sleep. This was not new. She had not slept cleanly through a night since her first deployment, when she had discovered that her brain maintained a second operational layer that continued running calculations independent of whether the rest of her was trying to rest. She had stopped fighting it years ago and had built her sleep around it. Short intervals, light, enough to function. Her body had learned to run on less than it asked for. She lay in the dark and mapped the building in her head. Northwestern quadrant of the industrial sector. 3rd orth floor for the elevation angle. Southeast-facing aperture to cover the main transit corridor. She had calculated the distance from the probable position to the intersection where 3 of the 4 casualties had occurred, 1,490 to 1,560 meters, depending on exact floor. She had spent 11 days refining that number to the point where it no longer felt like an estimate. It felt like a fact she hadn't confirmed yet. She thought about Sayer writing patrol element in the operational annex. Not her name, not her rank. A function slotted into the position that caused him the least administrative friction. She thought about her father, standing in the October wind on a hilltop in Wyoming, arms crossed, saying nothing after a good shot, because nothing was the right size for what he meant. She thought about what Fallon had said 3 weeks ago in the motor pool. Be ready for whatever he isn't watching. She got up at 03:30. She went to the equipment bay. She checked her rifle the way she always checked it. Component by component, every seal, every adjustment, every variable within her control confirmed and reconfirmed, because the variables outside her control were already as managed as they were going to get. The rest was math and stillness, and the space between her heartbeats. She went back to her cot. She closed her eyes. She let the calculation run one more time, and then she set it down, because the calculation was done, and there was nothing left to add to it. Either it was right or it wasn't, and she was going to be ready either way. October 14th, they moved at 0500. Trent fell into step beside her 20 minutes into the movement and did not say anything for a long time. When he did speak, he kept his voice below the sound of boots on gravel. "Sergeant Darrow, you still think it's the same building?" I think the data says it is, she said. What happens if we walk into that district, and you're right, and nobody's positioned for it? She kept walking, her eyes reading the high ground geometry of the blocks ahead. Then we hope someone responds fast enough when the contact happens. He was quiet. Then does it scare you, knowing something that nobody else sees? The not knowing is what scares most people, she said. The knowing is just information. The question is whether you're ready to use it. What if you're ready and you're not allowed to? She didn't answer that one immediately. It was the honest question under everything, and it had been sitting in her chest since the Thursday morning when Sayer had set her diagram down and said her medical assessment was noted. She thought about the honest answer for 3 steps. Then she gave it to him. Then you position yourself as close to useful as you can get, she said. And you wait. He walked beside her for another 10 minutes without speaking. When he fell back to his position in the formation, she did not watch him go. She was already calculating the rooftop geometry of the buildings on the eastern side of the street. They entered the industrial district at 0622. Darrow was positioned with the medical element, where Sayer had placed her in the operational order, 3 positions behind the lead vehicle. She had spent the previous afternoon identifying alternative positions in the district that would give her a line of sight to the northwest sector building if the situation required it. The situation required it 11 minutes after they entered the district. The contact was a single shot from the northwest. The convoy leader, First Lieutenant Driscoll, went down on the right side of the road, single wound, upper chest. He was alive. He was not going to stay that way for long without intervention. Darrow was moving before the net had finished establishing contact. She was already running the scene in 2 parallel tracks, the medical track assessing distance and approach to Driscoll, and the analytical track confirming in real time what 11 days of dead reckoning had been pointing toward: the shot angle, the distance, the building. She reached Driscoll in 40 seconds. She was working on him when she keyed her radio. Darrow to Sayer, single contact, northwest, I have the position. 3rd floor, northwest building, 2nd aperture from the left, southeast face. Sayer's voice came back. All elements hold. Darrow, treat the casualty. Sir, the shooter is still in position. If he reloads and adjusts, we have 11 more people in the open. All elements cover and hold. She kept working on Driscoll. His breathing was labored but present. The entry wound was clean, and the trajectory angle told her everything she needed to know about the range. She pressed her hands against the wound and lifted her eyes to the northwest skyline and found the building, and at the 3rd floor 2nd aperture, she saw what she had been calculating for 11 days. A shadow, a shape, the geometry of a man doing exactly what she had told Sayer he would be doing. She keyed the secondary channel. Fallon, I have eyes on the position. 3rd floor, northwest, 2nd aperture, 1,540 meters. Fallon's voice, I see the building. What do you need? A rooftop on the east side, 20 feet of elevation. Someone to cover Driscoll while I move. 20 seconds of silence. Then Fallon, Trent has Driscoll, move. She was already moving. The rooftop she had identified the previous afternoon was a 4-story warehouse 60 meters east of the casualty site. She entered through the ground floor, took the stairs at a run, and was prone on the east-facing roof with her rifle set up in 41 seconds. She had counted. Counting was what she did when she needed to know exactly where she was in time. She put her eye to the scope. The building was there, the aperture was there, the shadow was still there, in the process of repositioning, adjusting for the distance and the angles of the element now spread across the road below. He was taking his time. He believed he had time. She keyed her radio. Darrow to Sayer. I have a direct line on the contact I can engage. Requesting permission. A pause. The length of it was different from the usual pauses on the net. This one had a specific texture. The texture of a man confronting a situation that did not fit his map and having to decide in real time which was more reliable. You're a medic asset, Sayer said. Negative on engagement. Sir, the shooter is repositioning for a second shot. We have 11 people in the open. Negative. Maintain position. She kept her eye on the scope. The figure in the aperture was settling into a stillness she recognized from the inside and could identify from the outside. The stillness that preceded a decision. The wind at this elevation was 8 miles per hour, northeast. She had been tracking wind flags on the route the entire movement. The temperature was 94 degrees Fahrenheit. The distance was 1,540 meters. Bullet drop at this range, 38 meters of arc. Time of flight, 2.3 seconds. She had done this math every night for 11 days. It was not a calculation anymore. It was a remembered fact. Sayer, she said. Her voice was flat and clear and carried nothing except the information. If he fires again, in the next 30 seconds, we will take a second casualty. I can stop that. Give me the authorization. A longer pause. She heard in the space of that pause, Fallon's voice on the command net, quiet, measured, the voice of 19 years of exactly this kind of situation. Sir, she's been right about this position for 11 days. Give her the shot. 4 more seconds, she counted them. Then Sayer said, in a voice that was quieter than his usual command voice, quieter in a way that meant something had shifted in it, Darrow, what is your confidence level? She found the stillness in the aperture. She measured the wind. She ran the drop one final time. Every number was exactly where she had left it the night before. High, she said. One word. No qualification. No hedging. Because she had been doing this math for 11 days, and the answer had not changed, and it was not going to change, and she was either ready or she wasn't. She was. Another 3 seconds. Engage, said Sayer. She exhaled. She found the space between her heartbeats. She squeezed. The rifle fired. The sound was massive and immediate and then gone, absorbed by the morning air and the concrete geometry of the city around her. She kept the scope on the aperture. She did not move. She did not blink. 2.3 seconds is not a long time in any ordinary context. On a rooftop in Ramadi with 11 soldiers in the street below and a round potentially already in the chamber of a weapon 1,540 meters away, 2.3 seconds was its own complete world. 1. She held the scope steady. 2. She did not breathe. The figure in the aperture dropped. Not a stumble, not a fall. A drop, the instantaneous, total of a body in which something essential has stopped. There was no drama in it. There never was. The net filled immediately. Fallon, target down. All elements, contact neutralized. Cover the wounded. Sayer's voice controlled. All elements, hold positions, security outward. And then Trent, apparently forgetting all radio discipline, on an open channel, she hit it. 1,500 meters, she hit it. Did anyone, Sergeant Fallon? Did you see that? Fallon, with the patience of a man who has been doing this longer than Trent, has been alive. Off the net, private. Trent, yes, Sergeant, sorry. But did you? Trent, off the net. Yes, Sergeant, off the net, but... Darrow kept her scope on the building for the next 90 seconds, sweeping for secondary positions, any additional personnel, anything she might have missed in 11 days of calculation. The building was still. The street below was consolidating. She heard Driscoll's voice on the net, weak but present, which meant he was conscious, which meant he had time. She pulled back from the scope. Her hands were steady. They were always steady after. She had long since stopped being surprised by this and had started simply being grateful for it, quietly and without ceremony. She was back at Driscoll's position in 4 minutes. Trent had the bleeding managed with the focused, correct technique of someone who had been paying attention during medical training. She checked Driscoll's airway, confirmed vitals, made 2 adjustments to the dressing, and called for the medevac. Sayer found her at the casualty collection point. He stood in the same approximate distance he had maintained in the briefing room 11 days ago, but something in the geometry of it was different. He was not filling the space the same way. Sergeant Darrow, he said. Sir, the engagement. He stopped. He looked at the street, then back at her. He had the expression of a man working through something he had not finished working through, and who knows he has not finished, but has decided not to wait anyway. Distance? 1490 to 1560, based on the building position, she said. I called it 1540 at the time of engagement. That's past. He stopped again. The published effective range, sir, yes. He was quiet. She waited. She had learned to wait in these moments without making the waiting into a performance of patience, because patience was not passive. It was its own form of presence, and she had cultivated it across years of situations that required her to let other people arrive at their own conclusions. That was the right call, he said finally. The decision to engage. He paused. The shot. She looked at him. Thank you, sir. He nodded once. He turned to go. Then he stopped, not fully facing her, angled just slightly back toward her. "The intel assessment you submitted 11 days ago," he said. He paused. It was accurate. She waited. "It should have been acted on earlier," he said. "That's on me." She held that for a moment. Not the apology. She did not know yet if it was an apology or what it was going to become. Just the fact of it. A lieutenant in the field saying, "That's on me," without being required to. That was not nothing. "Yes, sir," she said. "It should have." He walked away. The after-action report was filed that evening. Darrow found out from Trent, who had been in the operations section for duty rotation and had seen the report before it went to battalion. He came to find her at 0645 the next morning. He did what she had trained him to do in the field. He delivered information directly, without softening it. "The engagement," he said, "is listed as effective fire from patrol element. Your name isn't in it." She looked at him for a long moment. "How many times does patrol element appear?" He thought about it. 8, maybe 9. She nodded. She looked out at the motor pool. The morning light was the amber it always was at this hour, doing nothing different from what it did every other day, indifferent to what had occurred inside it. "Who reviews it before battalion?" she said. "Major Ashford," he said. She nodded again. She went back to her vehicle inspection. Ashford called Sayer in at 0900. Darrow knew this because Fallon told her, with the economy of a man who communicates in the minimum number of words required to convey maximum information. Ashford had the after-action alongside the radio transcript log, which was automatically recorded on every frequency. The transcript said, in timestamp text, "Darrow, what is your confidence level?" And then, "Engage." And then a gap of 2.3 seconds and a target neutralized. The transcript did not say patrol element. The transcript said her name. "What did Ashford say?" Darrow asked. Fallon looked at her with the measured attention that was his version of delivering important information carefully. He said, "This report mentions a patrol element 9 times and does not once mention the soldier who made this engagement. I want you to explain that to me, Lieutenant, or I will explain to you why that distinction matters." Darrow kept her face neutral. "What did Sayer say?" He said the designation was the appropriate professional framing for the role. She looked at the vehicle in front of her. She thought about appropriate professional framing. And Ashford said, Fallon continued, "The radio transcript disagrees with your framing. What the transcript shows is a soldier who provided accurate intelligence for 11 days, repositioned herself independently under contact, made a 1,540-meter engagement that stopped an active shooter, and did all of it while simultaneously treating a casualty. That soldier has a name. Her name goes in the report." Darrow stood in the motor pool and felt something move through her that she did not immediately name. It was not anger. She had managed the anger the night before in the dark, and it had settled into something steadier. It was not quite relief, because one corrected report was one corrected report, and she had been in the Army long enough to understand what a pattern looked like and how long a pattern took to change. What she felt was closer to this, being seen, not celebrated, not vindicated, seen. Someone had looked at a document and said her name goes in it. That was the specific thing, her name, in the record, in the language that lasted. She picked up her wrench. She said quietly to Fallon, "Thank you for telling me." He said, "You earned the right to hear it first." They went back to work. Ashford's review went to battalion that afternoon. The corrected after-action identified Staff Sergeant Darrow by name, rank, and action at each relevant point in the record. The intelligence assessment she had filed 11 days earlier was formally included and annotated. Assessment submitted September 3, 2005. Assessment confirmed accurate by subsequent engagement on September 14, 2005. Sayer, to his credit, did not fight the correction. He signed the amended report. He also submitted a separate addendum that Darrow learned about from Fallon several days later. In it, Sayer had documented 11 days of independent analysis that had preceded the engagement, not the shot he had written, the work behind it. That also belongs in the record. People didn't transform. Darrow knew that. She had spent enough time in enough rooms to understand that the distance between what someone was and what they were capable of becoming was rarely crossed in a single moment. But sometimes they changed direction, and sometimes that was enough to matter. The formal recognition came at a battalion formation on a Friday in October. Darrow stood in the open area between the operations center and the motor pool while Lieutenant Colonel Ashford read her citation aloud in front of 214 soldiers. She stood at attention and listened to her own name and fixed her eyes on a point on the far wall and did not allow herself to feel the full weight of it until it was over, because feeling it fully in front of 214 people was not something her constitution permitted. When Ashford pinned the medal to her uniform, he said quietly, in the space between the two of them, "You did the math when nobody else was doing it. That belongs in this army." She said, "It was the only thing to do, sir." He stepped back. He saluted her. She returned it. Afterward, Trent found her in the crowd. He stood in front of her with an expression that was entirely inadequate to what he appeared to be trying to express. He put out his hand. She shook it. That was sufficient. Fallon walked beside her back toward the motor pool. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "Your father's going to want to know." "I called him last night," she said. He looked at her sideways. "How'd he take it?" She thought about the call. Her father had listened to the whole account in the silence that was his natural mode. The same silence he had maintained on the range in Wyoming, while she worked through a shot that was too far for her age and her rifle and her experience, and had made it anyway. When she finished, he had been quiet for a moment. Then he had said, 1,540 meters. "Yes," she had said. He was quiet again. Then he said again, which was what he had said when she was 9 years old and had made a shot she had no right to make. It had been the most complete form of approval she had ever received from any human being, and it had not diminished in the 30-some years since. He said again, she told Fallon. Fallon nodded once. "That tracks," he said. They walked together into the afternoon, and neither of them felt the need to add anything to that. Years passed. Darrow left the Army at the end of her 4th contract, not because she had run out of things to give it, but because she had finished what she had come to do, and she understood the difference. She went back to Wyoming for a year, then took a consulting position with a federal law enforcement agency that needed someone who could read pattern data in casualty reports and translate it into actionable geometry. She was good at it. She had always been good at the math, underneath the math. She kept her rifle. She shot on weekends when the weather allowed, which in Wyoming was more weekends than people from other places expected. She did not give interviews. She did not attend the ceremonies that periodically convened to discuss historical engagements from the Iraq War, though she received invitations to several. She filed those invitations in the same place she filed everything, carefully, and then away. Fallon retired 2 years after she did. He sent a single email that read in its entirety, "Done. Going fishing. You did good, Darrow." She read it 4 times and saved it in a folder she did not organize very carefully, which was uncharacteristic and which she did not examine too closely. Trent made sergeant on his 2nd re-enlistment. He sent her a message when it happened. She wrote back, "About time." He replied with a photograph of his new rank insignia, and she looked at it longer than she would have told him. One evening in late November, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't pick up. She picked up. The voice on the other end was young, female, and precise in the way of someone who had rehearsed what she wanted to say and was working not to let the rehearsal show. "Sergeant Darrow? This is Specialist Ferrano. I'm at Fort Campbell. I'm in medic training, and I'm also doing the marksman cross-training program." And she stopped. "I found the amended after-action from Ramadi. Someone posted it in a training forum. I read the intelligence assessment, all 11 days of it." Darrow waited. "I wanted to ask." Ferrano stopped again. "I don't really know what I wanted. I just needed to call." "How did you get this number?" Darrow said. "Sergeant First Class Fallon," Ferrano said. "He told me if I was serious enough to track him down, I was serious enough to make the call." Darrow made a mental note to call Fallon. She also made a mental note that she would not actually say anything to Fallon when she did. "What do you want to know?" Darrow said. Ferrano said, "How do you start? The analysis, the reading of a situation before anyone else sees it. Where do you actually start?" Darrow sat at her kitchen table. On the shelf across the room was the shadow box her father had built the month after she came home. Inside it, the metal, the brass casing from the round, and a printed copy of the corrected after-action report, her name appearing 11 times in yellow ink, every place it belonged. She thought about a briefing room in Ramadi and a lieutenant with a clipboard deciding what his map said. She thought about 11 days of mathematics filed and dismissed and right. She thought about 1,540 meters in 2.3 seconds and the specific sound of a command net going completely silent. Start with the data nobody else is reading, Darrow said. In any situation, there is always data being collected and not analyzed. Find that first. Everything else comes after. A pause on the line. Then okay. And then what? Then you do the math, Darrow said. All of it. More than you think you'll need. You do it before anyone asks you to, and you do it again the next day, and you keep doing it until the situation resolves or it becomes relevant. Because when it becomes relevant, you will not have time to start. Another pause. What if the people above you don't want to hear it? Then you be ready anyway, Darrow said. You cannot always control what they listen to. You can control how prepared you are when the moment arrives. She heard Ferrano writing something down, the sound of a pen on paper, which Darrow found oddly clarifying. One more thing, Ferrano said. The shot. The citation says the published effective range is 800 meters. How did you know you could do it at 1,540? Darrow was quiet for a moment. She thought about the honest answer, the way she thought about all honest answers, directly, without softening. I didn't know, she said. I had calculated that I could. That's a different thing. Knowing is a feeling, calculating is a fact. When the moment came, I trusted the calculation. Is that how it always works? That's how it works when the math is done right, Darrow said. The shot doesn't happen without the math. Most people want to skip to the moment. That's why most people aren't ready for it when it comes. A long pause. Then Ferrano said quietly, okay, I want to learn the math. Darrow pulled a notepad toward her. She uncapped a pen. Then let's start, she said. And she kept talking until the calculation was clear, because that was what the math was for. Not only to save the lives in front of you, but to prepare the person on the other end of the line for the lives that would one day need saving in front of them. That was what she had been doing. For 20 years in one form or another, the work before the shot, the math before the moment, the 11 days of right answers that no one wanted to hear until the territory finally, completely, and permanently refused to match the map. She had never, not once in her life, been the kind of person who set down a thing that still had work left in it.